Spoiler alert for the episode you're about to listen to for the 2023 film Nefarious.
Welcome to Monkeys Unfiltered, the podcast where chaos meets conversation, and the unexpected is always on the menu. Join hosts Leanne, Jason, and Hayden as they swing through life's absurd, hilarious, and thought-provoking moments. No topic is too wild, no opinion is too untamed. Get ready for unfiltered banter, laughs, and a barrel of fun. This is Monkeys Unfiltered.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Monkeys Unfiltered. I'm Mama Monkey, and with me are my trusty side monkeys, Hayden and Jason. How are you guys today?
I'm good.
I am conflicted now after seeing that movie.
Oh, wait, don't give it away. Don't give it away, but I'm with you. So, listeners, we have a little bit of something different for you today. We share this podcast as life and stuff, and we usually get in a few laughs, and we've shared a little bit about ourselves and things that we enjoy, but we thought we would try something a little different today. I stumbled across a movie on Netflix, or was it Prime
Video.
I stumbled across a movie one night with my husband. We like to watch just crazy stuff. And I had never heard of this movie, but apparently when I brought it to you two monkeys, or at least you, Jason, you had some knowledge of it, which then led me to believe I must live under a rock, because as I started digging in and researching, apparently there was a lot of controversy about this movie. So we all have watched the movie individually, and we're going to share our opinions, break it down for you today. And I know you're sitting there going, what movie is she talking about? Did I miss the name of the movie? No, you did not. We all have spent time watching the movie Nefarious. And if you are not familiar with this movie, it was marketed as a horror movie, which I think did the movie a huge disservice. It is not a horror movie at all. When I think of horror movie, I think of things like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, The Conjuring. Those to me are horror movies, things that make you jump, scare you. This movie just made me...
It's like a psychological thriller.
Definitely.
I was just thinking that very, very same term.
Definitely a psychological thriller. I was even reading a review as I was preparing for today, because we came in today, no script, no pre-conversation. So we will be sharing our opinions and ideas with each other for the first time. But a psychological thriller is probably the better description for it. I began watching the movie, and I will confess, like the first opening part of it, I was like, oh, okay, it's going to be a horror movie, because as the movie opens, and so spoiler, if you haven't seen it, you're going to know all about it by the time we're done. The opening scene of the movie where the original doctor is in his office and he's adjusting his diploma on the wall, and he turns his back to it, and then it goes crooked again, and he continues about his work at his desk, and it goes crooked again. And, he eventually, what he's leading up to doing is leaping to his death off of the top of his office building. And then it really goes cockeyed. But as I was seeing that happen, I'm like, okay, this is going to be a movie about, entities and all that sort of stuff. Little did I know. Just a quick breakdown on what the movie is. There is a man, is this Texas, right? They're in Texas, right? Oklahoma. So just a quick synopsis of what the movie is about. There's a gentleman on death row in Oklahoma, and apparently the laws in Oklahoma state that you have to be competent, which this makes no sense to me. You have to be competent to be executed. And so he has to undergo psychological evaluations. And the doctor who jumps to his death at the beginning of the movie was ready to declare the guy insane, which meant he would not be executed. comes in this new doctor who takes his place. As he first comes into the prison, the warden is telling him, this guy's crazy. He's going to have you thinking you're crazy before it's over with. You got to be really careful about your conversation with him. And the guy who plays the nefarious character, what's his name? Sean Flannery? Sean Patrick Flannery.
Something like that.
So good in this movie. And then I was reading he was in a couple of other movies that I liked as well. So I get it. I just didn't recognize his face. But so good in this movie because he, in essence, plays the two characters. But the bulk of this movie takes place in this interview room where the psychiatrist is trying to determine whether he's insane or not, whether he's fit to be executed. And just some crazy stuff goes on. And he ends up being executed, and some more craziness happens at the end of the movie.
Can I just say, the guy that plays Dr. James Martin, Jordan Belfi, looks like he could have been Superman in the 90s.
He looks like someone who you should recognize.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. I'm like, why do I know that guy? And then I looked at him and I was like, I have no idea who that guy is.
Being that this is the first time the three of us are sitting down to actually talk about this movie, I want to hear y'all's first impression of this movie, because I was, like you, Jason, conflicted, had all kinds of thoughts going on in my head, questioned whether I should have actually watched the movie or not. Yeah, I had crazy emotions. What about you guys?
So I'm going to let Hayden go first on this.
I think I came at this movie at a way different perspective than either of you two did, just based off of beliefs.
Sure.
As much as this movie presents itself as a horror movie, it is a very faith-based movie. And it's not to say like it is a Christian movie, but it's a theological mental battle is really what it is, right? And to me, like, it was cool to listen to him break down and explain what they were trying to accomplish, like, obviously he claims he's possessed by a demon, and the whole time the movie like is making you like question whether he really is or isn't, and he knows things he shouldn't really know and stuff like that, and he can recall things from the history between the battle of heaven and hell. I loved every second of it. Like, yeah, the first like 20-ish minutes or so, I was like, I'm gonna fall asleep, man. This movie is slow paced, and I just can't. And then it was 5:00 in the morning, and I'm watching YouTube videos about what the ending means, where this is, who Nefarious was as a character in real lore and stuff like that. So it was just like, it really like grabbed me and took me for a ride.
Yeah. How about you, Jason?
I really enjoyed this. Like, obviously, when we talk about spirituality and spiritual warfare, there are things that we can't quite grasp as human beings, right? Even concepts like the death penalty or abortion, which get touched on in the video or in the film. Again, these are moral issues that mankind has struggled for a long time to try and figure out what is just. And so, like, this just needs to be said that we're not necessarily at Monkeys Unfiltered advocating for one stance or the other. There are a set of beliefs that I personally hold as pertains to my faith, but that's not necessarily what this podcast is for. But I do think that when you touch on spirituality and these moral issues, it's difficult to kind of nail down exactly what we're meant to be doing, right? Because when people read the Bible, you get all kinds of different interpretations of the exact same statements. You get different denominations. Like, I don't even know how many denominations of Christianity there actually are, but it's astronomical. And so everybody has their own little idiosyncrasies and particular rules that they follow as part of their denomination. Personally, I attend a non-denominational church because I think that more often than not, people get weighed down by doctrine and their assumption that their line of thinking is correct. Whereas ultimately, what I try and do is let God's intent speak for itself. And I kind of just take things as they come and do my best to try and understand them. But these are all like really abstract concepts that we're trying to deal with God problems with human brains. And it's just, you're never going to reach a point where everyone's happy. And that's kind of like what the world is this is a place where we all get to make our own choices, and somebody at the end of the day is not going to like something that someone else does. So I think this movie does really good at touching on that sort of stuff.
So I did a little bit of reading after watching the movie too, because like you, Jason, I am, of a Christian faith. I don't subscribe to religion per se, Baptist, Methodist, Catholic, all of that. But I have a faith and I believe in God, and I believe, he is the way, right? And I believe, what's written in the Bible. I believe what the Bible says God says about me. Those are my personal faiths and my personal beliefs. So after watching this movie, I kind of backed away going, Hayden, you kind of touched on it, where the nefarious character talks about what they are trying to do and dives into the whole dialogue about all of the underworld. And he admits that, they one time where he calls him the carpenter's dad, or he never calls him God. He calls him all kinds of other, the enemy. Yeah, he calls him all kinds of things. But he admits, that at one time they were all united, which is how the Bible tells that story. And then he goes in and says, at one point in their existence, they discovered the truth, which, Jason, you may be able to speak on this a little deeper too, made me think of like the tree of life and the tree of good and evil, in that they are two distinctly different things,
mm-hmm.
or the tree of knowledge.
So it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life.
And so when he says, we discovered the truth, that in my mind immediately, as I was watching this movie as a Christian, conjured up that, that expression of the Bible, and like, okay, because that is how they fell, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he does talk about them ruling the earth. But what I found so interesting and so well done in this movie is the way he just slowly drew psychiatrist into what he was talking about. He just, without even the psychiatrist gives him permission to inhabit his body, which he tells him up front, I can't inhabit you unless you invite me in. And then the psychiatrist,
multiple times.
Right. And so later on in the conversation, he gets the psychiatrist, fine, do it, inhabit me. And he thinks he's being flippant and cute. He doesn't realize what he's done. And for me, that was such a correlation to look at society, how we just take things as everyday normal,
mm-hmm.
without realizing what we're doing. For me, like, and I mean, there are much grander things to stand on, but I live at the beach. And so I'm trying to get my husband off of single-use plastic water bottles. We live in an area where there's a high nesting of sea turtles. And so thinking about those plastics and like the 6-pack ring things, I'm that nerd who stands at the trash can and cuts them all up, so a marine mammal can't get, hung up in them or whatever. And I think just how normal it is for society to drink water out of a bottle and toss it in the trash can, and with no thought of where it's going and how it's going to impact the world. So take that on a bigger scale to the things that they were talking about, because Nefarious tells him when he walks in, before you leave here today, you're going to commit 3 murders. And that sounds like crazy. When you hear it in the movie, you're like, what? He's going to kill? You instantly think he's going to kill 3 people. But then as the story unfolds, I got kind of sucked into that.
Yeah. That's what I was saying about, like, he knows things that, like, somebody who's been in prison shouldn't know, right?
Oh, he knew all about this guy, right?
Like, he knew that this dude's girlfriend was at the clinic at that moment getting an abortion.
Right.
Or what he call it? Getting a elective
removal or something. Yeah, but basically then he equates it to an offering.
Yeah, that's a really good picture of what humanity does, right? So Nefarious is trying to point out to James, the psychiatrist, how your society may look a lot different now than it did 2,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago, but you're not very much far off from what you were doing back then anyway. His whole concept, as he tries to explain to James, is that the main idea behind
Right.
Legion, which are the demons, was to corrupt God's creation, right? It wasn't necessarily to get back in God's favor or anything like that. They completely reject God. Um, how he explained it was, how can you create a being, endow it with will, and then tell it not to use it, right? And so that, I don't know if everyone knows this, but demons are in fact fallen angels who rebelled in Genesis. And so there's debate among, religious scholars, whatever, that how can there be rebellion among created beings who maybe didn't have a will, right? And so a lot of people think angels are just kind of mindless servants of God. Then there's the concept of the rebellion. So, like, how can you rebel if you don't have a will with which to do that? So it's really an interesting
Mm-hmm.
take that they took, saying that the demons, hey, we were endowed with will and then told not to use it. Like, how is that not abuse or slavery? And he talks about how there's active slavery in the world now, and how more than half of them are sex slaves. And it really hits you right in the core. Our character, our representation in the movie is meant to be James. Doesn't matter like what your religious stance is or whatever, but how many times have you heard people say, well, I don't believe in that, or that's not real, or whatever. When James says he's an atheist, Nefarious says, do you think that will protect you?
I stopped dead.
Yeah, because so many people try to take that approach. And now, again, this is coming from my personal belief system. I do believe the Word of God to be 100% truth. But how often do you hear people say, well, I don't believe in that, right? And even if it's just a facet of their religious beliefs, if you don't believe in a portion of what God says, then you might as well not believe any of it. Because for me personally, the Word of God is 100% true. So if you pick and choose from
Right.
it, you're missing the whole point.
I found it kind of interesting too, just how he kind of just continuously, and he would just come at James in down different avenues, talking about, his girlfriend having the abortion. And he says to him, if you were truly, I don't think this is exactly how he said it, but he's like, you basically have been deceiving this girl. Like, he even asked her, does she know that you want to break up with her? Does she know that, you're actively looking for someone else? But of course, you're not going to leave her until you have somebody else, so that you're not on your own. Just the way he breaks down what everyday society, and I mean, I'm not saying that all of society is evil or wrong or bad, but it just makes you really look at how just the simplest things that we just accept really can
Right.
drill down.
Or rationalize.
Rationalize is a great word, because James does become so moved by what Nefarious is saying to him that he calls to leave the interview room, and he lets the guard put him in the prisoner's phone bank to try to call the clinic. I firmly believe, and even though Nefarious had made it abundantly clear that it was happening at that moment, I really do think he was calling in hopes that he could have stopped something, stopped her actions,
Mm-hmm.
said to her, confess, if you will, that he was wrong and he wanted to be forgiven. But that didn't happen. And it just really kind of messed with him. And so when he goes back in the room, Nefarious is like, I told you you were going to commit 3 murders.
Well, and so real quick, as a side note to this particular incident in the movie, Jordan Belfi, I'm not exactly sure the pronunciation, but his wife had just given birth to their first child
Oh, crazy.
as this
I
movie
have an
was being
interesting thing
filmed.
about this movie being filmed.
Go ahead.
So, it deals it deals with
All the
like
stuff that
demons and
happened to
stuff
them.
like that and whatnot.
Yeah.
Apparently, in the first 11 days of this movie being filmed, there were 8, like on 8 separate occasions, 8 different crew members got into car accidents.
Car accidents. Yep.
Wow. People go, oh, that's just a coincidence, or it's just, and I don't really believe in coincidence. I believe that for every action, there is a reaction. And Hayden, I know you kind of stand more in the scientific, like, I need to see it, touch it. I need the proof behind it. Stepping out in that just pure faith thing can be a little challenging. And I'm not knocking you. I think it is a lot of your generation, because you guys have always, as long as you've been on this planet, you've been able to Google or validate, or you've never had to just take someone's word for something per se.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, because they even gave one of the producers of this movie gave an interview, and somewhere in there he was saying how, because they got a lot of flack for how the trailer came out. He tells the truth. Yes, the trailer is engineered. Everything that you see in the trailer, you see in the movie, but not the way you see it in the trailer. And he says we did that on purpose because we specifically were trying to reach a certain group of people, a certain part of the population that we feel so desperately needs to hear this message before it's too late, was his exact words. But they got a lot of flack for manipulating. That happens all the time in movie trailers. Like, Don and I go see a lot of movies, and so we'll watch the trailer and go, wow, this looks awesome. And then we'll go see it. We're like, well, where was that part? And you realize that's marketing, right? So he was trying to get people into his movie. I'm not here to say whether that was right or wrong or indifferent. I work in marketing. We do things all the time to, scale and optimize, right? But I found it interesting. And now, Hayden, you say that about the car accidents, that they knew 100% that they were going to get backlash for doing this, but they believed so wholly in the message that they wanted to bring forth that they were willing to take that, right? And so that, to me, in my mind, kind of went back to, the presentation of Jesus as the way, the truth, and the light, right? And that you only come to God through him. And Jesus knew what he was stepping into when he hit this planet, but he did it because that was what needed to happen for the salvation, right? And so, like, that's a big, huge concept, but bring it down. Hayden, how many times do we talk about things and, we end a conversation with, well, there's nothing I can do about that, or it just is what it is.
Yeah.
Or if I say anything, it's not going to make any difference.
Yep.
It's that gentle leading of, I'm just going to say it, of the world down the nefarious path. Hayden, you said you watched a bunch of YouTube videos.
Yeah, I mean, it was more like breaking down the message the movie was trying to get at, and especially, like, particularly the ending.
You're talking about, like, when he goes on the Glenn Beck show?
So, like, when he's on the show,
yeah,
and, he's talking about the book, how he rewrote it, and, like, the book that he supposedly wrote is the actual book that the movie is based off of. And, when he comes out of the interview, he sees that woman digging through the trash, and he gives her a $20 bill. She turns around and is like, hi, James. And then she sounds like Nefarious. She's like, did you miss me?
Right.
But, like,
you did that pretty good.
But, like, just the message that brings, because the whole time in his interview, so, like, to backtrack, he sees, I don't remember the actual guy's name, being executed. And then, like, Nefarious is like, Edward. Yeah. I kept thinking of Wayne Brady from Whose Line.
Me too.
Yeah. He's like, I'll see you soon or whatever. And then Edward gets executed, and he hears Nefarious in his mind.
In his head.
And then all of a sudden he has no control over his body. He takes the dude's gun and he tries to unalive himself. But right before he tries that, he says, oh God, please help me. And nothing happens with the gun. He pulls the trigger 3 times, nothing happens. And then later in the interview, he talks about, they took the gun in for ballistics, saw 3 distinct markings from the firing pin, and when they tested it, it worked perfectly fine. And the video I watched was talking about, like, he's had these encounters. He had a direct encounter with a demon. He's had the encounter with divine intervention, or at least that's what you're led to believe. And yet by the end of the movie, he doesn't fully lean into being a Christian. He still has disbelief that any of it is real. And it's kind of just like he's just trying to warn people. He's like, I'm well aware that there is a spiritual world, but he's not devout. He still denies a lot. And so when he comes out and he has the re-encounter with Nefarious, it's like the message of, well, you haven't accepted it, so the demons have come back.
They're still pursuing you. Right.
Like, how can
Yeah.
you have that experience and not... This war is unending until Christ's second return. Like, that is written. As long as you're in the world, you'll be dealing with these things. And so in Ephesians 6, verse 12, Paul writes that for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So it's a reminder that this isn't a war between each other. This is a war between the spiritual realms, right? The good and evil of it all. And to have an encounter like that and not realize what you've just been through, and to stay kind of on that lukewarm side, you notice that, you know, he's a believer, quote unquote, but he doesn't like fully commit. He doesn't depend on God. He doesn't fully, go that route, like you said, Hayden. Interestingly enough, Revelation 3:16 and 17 say, "So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I am rich and affluent and have no need of anything, and yet you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked." So these people who say, I believe in a higher power, and this is not me calling out anyone specifically, but for you say there's a higher power, I just don't know what that is. So you're in that lukewarm section. We call that CYA. You're covering your bases just in case, and just God does not honor that to any degree. He would rather you choose to not than to stay lukewarm.
So when we talk about the book, him writing the book, just for the sake of those listening who have not seen the movie, Nefarious tells James very early on, he sent for James. And James is like, why would you do that? We don't even know each other. And he says, well, there's something I need you to do for me. And James is like, what is that? He's like, you're going to write my book. And James is like, I don't think so. But he does. Because what comes out in the movie is actually Nefarious had already written the manuscript. And they find it in his cell, and the warden hands it to James. He's like, did you know anything about this? And he's like, no, but he said I was going to write his book. So I instantly was thinking, but that's not you writing his story. That's him writing his story. So when he sits down to have the interview with Glenn Beck, and he's like, I rewrote it.
He played right into his hands. Yeah.
Yeah. You did exactly what he said you were going to do. But I also found it very interesting. And I'm kind of jumping around here a little bit. At the beginning of the movie, the warden, when he's walking James into the interview room for the first time, he calls Nefarious, Edward, whatever, a master manipulator.
Yep.
And, Jason, you and I talk about this a lot because, we have conversations about our faith or whatever. When you're manipulating someone, you're leading them astray, or you're influencing them to do your will. And that often involves lies, half-truths, bent truths, whatever you want to call it. A lie is a lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think all the time for me, Satan and all of that is a lie. It is manipulation. And so when you believe what the evil of the world tries to get you to just go, oh, it is what it is, or nothing I can do about that, that is a master manipulation. And he goes on to tell him, he will fast talk you so hard that you'll be wondering which one of you committed the murders.
Right. Satan would love nothing more than for you to, for one, believe that he's not real. For two, to believe that there's no spiritual warfare happening. Not even necessarily to not believe in God, but just to be distracted from him. A lot of people seem to think you're either evil or good, but it's like that lukewarm thing we talked about earlier. You cannot live in the middle ground. You have to pick a side. And people ask too, well, why does God allow such a thing? Well, he's honoring the fact that he endowed us with free will, right? And so he could make you love him at any point. He could make you do whatever, but he doesn't do that. And as far as James calling out to God in his moment of desperation, it's that desperation that brings you to a place where you have no other choice but to call on God, because we remain in control of our own lives so often, and we think that we can handle whatever comes our way. But for Christians, we have that backup, that support system of Christ, who helps us carry the load and share the burden. And he literally, all throughout the New Testament, describes exactly that. He came to serve, not to be served, right? And so when people, especially Christians who know better, try to white knuckle it and go forth with their own like strength, so to speak, and not call for help, God doesn't really honor the fact that you're trying to do things all on your own. He wants that burden placed on him because he knows that there are things you just can't handle. That's why he offers himself. And so when Jordan called out for help, God honored that because it was a step of faith. But when he didn't fully commit, that's when Nefarious comes back around and starts bothering him again. When
Right.
you resist the devil, he flees from you. James resisted, but he stopped resisting. And like you alluded to, Mom, he ended up rewriting the book, so ultimately doing what Nefarious wanted him to do in the first place. And then again, even though he wrote it as a warning, it's still like now his manifesto is out there, which is a bastardization of the Bible, and he wants Edward Wayne Brady's execution to mimic the crucifixion. He wants it to be a dark crucifixion, and
Right.
it's really absurd. I love what this movie did with their story.
Yeah. What were you going to say a while ago, Hayden, about Nefarious touching on?
Like he mentions in the like in their fall, it was all like the rebellion was all because you created us with will and everything that goes along with it, and then ordered us to not use it. So we didn't really rock with that, right? So they went about their rebellion and fell, and then God creates humanity with free will and lets them be, and that angers the demons. And it's like, how can you do one thing to us and then basically remake us in a new way and replace us? And he also he touches on like the fact that he gave you free will is the reason he won't help you, which is why we can do what we can do down here, because we don't have to follow those rules.
Right. In that vein of thought, I found it interesting that, when he's Nefarious is particularly pointing out, and you guys have, talking about humanity, and you guys have done this and done this. And, but it was really us through you creating all of this misery on earth. And then I forget exactly what it was he was talking about. I think it was bullying per se. And he's
Hate
like,
Racism.
that
speech.
wasn't even us. That was y'all. Hate speech. Yeah. That wasn't even us. That was y'all. Y'all have gone so far down the path that now you're turning on each other, and behaving in a manner that is pleasing to us, but causes real problems in the human race. And then when he goes on to talk about, they do touch on bullying, because that kind of stuck with me, because when he would let the character of Edward come forth and talk, you could tell that dude had been kicked around, right? He'd been abused, he'd been neglected, he'd been bullied, he'd been pushed around. And it really hit me hard to the point, and as a mom, I felt that kind of like maternal thing come out of me. It really hit me hard when he goes to order his last meal.
I was
Oh
just getting
my
ready to talk about
And
god,
he
that.
or
yeah.
yeah, and he orders the hamburger, the double bacon cheeseburger, well done, extra thick milkshake, and it takes him a really long time to get it out because Edward stutters, which we all know stuttering is, a form of anxiety. So, but then Nefarious pops right back in and goes, "Wait, I've changed my mind. I'm not hungry. I don't want a meal." Well, Edward doesn't know he's done that, and so now he's
Yeah,
been
later in the
moved,
movie.
huh?
Later in the movie.
Yeah. Now he's been moved to the holding cell where you go like to eat that meal right before you go to execution, which I don't understand why you eat a meal before you get executed, but
It's your last like worldly desire
I
or indulgence or
guess.
whatever.
Um, and he's like, "What about my meal?" And the guard is like, "Dude, you don't remember? You canceled the meal." And Edward just breaks down and cries. And at that moment, I just felt the weight of every child, and I have a child that grew up dealing with this. Every child that has been bullied, picked on, or kicked around for being different or not being what society says we should be. And it just really kind of hit me. And it took me into that kind of parental mindset, which takes me back to something you said earlier, Hayden, about when he's talking and Nefarious is like, it just basically kind of pissed us off that we didn't get an opportunity to have free will. We were told we had to, behave a certain way. We rebel. He kicks us out, creates you guys, and you guys get free will. What the heck? But if you stay in that parental mindset and you look at God as your heavenly father, and that is a type of communication you have. He is your parent, he is your father, parents make mistakes, right? And I'm not saying God makes mistakes, but parents evolve. And so God decided, when he puts man on the planet, okay, good, you can have free will. And he didn't even place us, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, because you'll know this better than me. We weren't even placed on earth with free will. It happened as a result of the temptation in the Garden of Eden. No?
So the garden always had the two options. That is the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The choice always existed. God gave Adam and Eve the instruction, you can eat from any tree except this one, and that's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so the snare with Satan is he is the most perfect liar there has ever been or
Master
ever will be.
manipulator.
Master manipulator, right? And so the irony is Satan used Eve's desire to be godlike
Right.
to ensnare her in committing the first sin on earth. So he said, did God truly say you can't eat from the tree? The reason he said that is because once you eat the fruit, God knows that you'll become like him and you'll know the difference. And so he's trying to keep you from being as wise as he is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you really get to the baseline of it all, what purpose does having the knowledge of good and evil serve Adam and Eve, right? Because they're in literal paradise. They don't toil. They don't work the ground. Everything they need is provided for them. There's complete harmony. What could be better, right?
Exactly the way everyone today wants to live is how it was.
Exactly. And so, yeah, and that's the irony, right? Because we continue this struggle, but like the answer is this is why I say the word of God is 100% truth. Every single situation that you face, there is scripture that speaks to that. And in this case, if you're in paradise, if you have everything you could ever want, why should you have the need of knowing the difference between good and evil? Because once that happened, the only thing that changed was they were now ashamed of the fact that they were naked. They were
Right.
now hiding from God because they were afraid of the repercussions, right? Whereas that wasn't the case beforehand. But Satan used their desire to be godlike against them.
Right. Hayden's been really quiet. I want to give him an opportunity to
No,
talk.
I mean, y'all have more to say on the subject than I do. I don't feel qualified enough to speak on a lot of the things. I'm coming at it from I'm watching a movie standpoint.
Yeah, which is fair.
But I would challenge you on that because you've made some really good correlations and you picked up on some really well written threads in this movie that speak to the balance of the biblical format on which the movie was formed. So I would challenge you to feel that you think that you don't have anything in the same realm as Jason and I to say. You are more, you do, and I said this earlier, you do tend to be more in the scientific, let me see it touch it, validate it kind of camp, because you stand a little bit differently than we do. What is your opinion on when those kind of things happen?
Magic is science we can't explain yet, right? That's like one of the things. So if it's something supernatural or something unexplainable, it's just something we don't understand how it happened or why it happened yet.
So if I could actually comment on that real quick, interestingly enough, in one of the interview videos that I watch after the fact, Sean Patrick Flannery talked about how particularly people explain the reason they don't believe is because they don't understand. Whereas what Sean says is that literally that is the reason that I do believe, because I can't understand. So he used this term, or this sentence, I guess. He said, us three sitting here, there was an interviewer and the two lead actors. He said, us three sitting here is about as likely as a 747 being assembled as a result of a tornado's winds. He says, again, like what I said, people don't believe because they can't explain it, but it's right opposite for him. The likelihood of us being created for whatever that looks like for you, to the run-ins that you have with specific people, the things that you do that lead you into relationships and vice versa, all this good stuff. All of that is such a interesting likelihood. And then again, just our body's makeup, it's hard to explain. And you talk about if it can't be explained scientifically, was the laws of nature, the laws of physics, whatever you call it, are set in motion, and so everything has to function within those laws. But where did the laws come from? That's how I look at it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I don't know. We can agree to disagree on things when it comes to this, Yeah.
That's fair. There were a couple of different things Nefarious says that I want to point out as very interesting. So the first of which is Nefarious says, "If I am who I say I am," which was a term God used a lot in the Old Testament. God, whenever he was asked, "What is your name?" he would just say, "I am," or "I am that I am." And so Nefarious used that as kind of like a mocking thing. And we already talked about the fact that he said, "You think atheism will protect you." Another one was James at one point says, "I didn't know this was a fight." And Nefarious responds and says, "And that's why
That's
you're
why you're
losing."
losing.
Exactly. And so James at one point also asks, "Is hell a feeling or a place?" And Nefarious says, "Yes."
Right.
People think it's just a lake of fire for torture and forever. And I don't necessarily have scripture to back this up, but I do feel like what we have here on earth, I think Paul wrote that Satan is the prince of the air, meaning that he kind of has some level of domain here on earth, and it's our job, again, with the selection process, we have to choose one side or the other to not fall victim to the ways of the earth and to stay in a place of heavenly thoughts.
Yeah, they have some conversation too early in the movie where, and this kind of stuck me, where James says to Edward Nefarious, I have the power to save you. Because he was talking, about if I deem you
Sign off.
insane, then they, you'll probably spend some time in an institution, eventually get out of here. What I have the power to save you. And that really struck me super hard, is that we as humans think that we can just fix everything, that we're in charge of stuff. And I hesitate to say that, we are our own God, right? That we are just the hierarchy of our line. And it just really stuck with me that I just thought it was so poetic that he would say, I have the power to save you. When really what we're here talking about is God and salvation. And that is really the only way to be saved.
There was a great cinematography moment where, if you notice, when James asks, he wants to speak to Edward and not Nefarious, the camera pans left behind James and reveals Edward. Then when Nefarious comes back, it pans back right behind James, right? But there's another scene where the camera is behind Edward / Nefarious, and it pans right to reveal James. But this is after they've made the deal that he's allowed to inhabit him. I just thought that was a really interesting cinematographic choice.
I also like that at the end when they do that pan from behind James and Nefarious lets Edward out every time, you hear this like audio cue of like a whooshing noise. I don't know if y'all heard it or not, but right as Edward is pronounced dead and you're looking at James through the glass, you can hear that noise.
You hear it.
And you're like, something's about to happen with James. And then, he's takes the gun.
Yeah. So, but like totally off like the topic of the movie, can we just for like 2 minutes talk about how awesome Flannery's portrayal of these two characters was?
Oh my God. He
incredible.
He was amazing at it.
He was great.
In interviews, he has the same little like tics and stuff. Like he's licking his lips and blinking. And
I think the only time I've ever seen one person play multiple characters so well is when, oh my God, I don't remember his name, but
and Split.
Yes. Yeah.
I can't think of his name either, but he was phenomenal too.
Oh my God, he played Charles Xavier. We're
was
sitting at computers with access.
I'm literally like, I just
that you do have
James
the power
McAvoy.
over.
James McAvoy,
Yes.
100%.
Oh my God, he was very good. And he played
really
like
good.
8 different characters in that
A
movie.
bunch of, and he just moved in and out of them like it was nothing, which, scares me a little, but okay. So final thoughts.
So the phrase "mene mene tekel parson," which is what Nefarious like quotes at James at the end of the movie, and I believe it was said at some other point. I can't exactly remember right now, but that just means you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. And so the story behind that is it's from Daniel 5:27. And it's the feast of Belteshazzar. And so Daniel has this reputation of being able to interpret dreams and signs and stuff. And so he calls him in and asks him to interpret it. And this is I don't know if you've heard where the hand writes on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so this is Daniel interpreting that message, and it says you've been weighed on the scales and found wanting. So it's saying you're not fit to have the kingdom that you have, and if you don't change,
right,
things will change for you, right? And so it's the same thing. I just thought it was interesting that he turned it in reverse on James because he didn't give in to the master, quote unquote's, will or design.
So if I gave it a rating, 29.5 bananas out of 32.
Very particular.
I was like, 29 what? Yeah, by no means is it a blockbuster, but I think that it was craftfully. Is that a word? Craftfully? Sure. Did I just make that up?
It's a word now because you say it is. All words. Hey, all words are made up.
Oh my God, Nefarious even says if you use it as a name, it's a name, right? Like,
yeah,
it's a name. It's my name. I thought the way the message, even though clearly, as the people associated with the movie have come out and said, they fully intended this as a message from the biblical side of things to the rest of the world. Even though that was clearly their intention, they owned that was their intention. You can, much like from your seat, Hayden, look at it and see a lot of correlations to how the world is today. And if that causes you to just stop and think, I need to be a better person. I need to be more aware of that person in the corner struggling who's driving me up a wall and I think they're crazy, may just need a friend. Or what I have really been working on for the last couple of years is learning to forgive, truly forgive, not just say I forgive you and then have some resentment or harbor something in the back of my mind that when you irritate me, I'm going to throw in your face. But working on giving that forgiveness and just extending grace to people because I don't know what your situation is, but I know that you have value in the world as a person. And so I just kind of took that from the movie, whether you're in the Christian camp or not, as kind of like the overarching theme that you could walk away with for that.
What's your banana rating then?
Well, because it wasn't a blockbuster, but because it really spoke to me and because I thought Flannery was excellent in it, I'm up there with you, 28, 29 bananas.
Out of what? It doesn't have to be out of
Sure.
32. It can be whatever you want.
Oh, I thought that was our scale.
No, that was just my scale.
So I'll do it 10. I'll do it on a scale of 10. I would give it a solid 7.5 or an 8.
Jason?
Yeah, I would say 8 too, because there's a lot of biblically inspired sections, but they do their own thing with it. Like, it's an interpretation of how possession and all that works. Not necessarily biblically accurate, but then again, there's plenty of things that can be inspired by something that don't have to mirror it entirely. The rub with doing it from a biblical perspective is it gets tricky when people think you're adding or taking away from the Bible, because you're not supposed to do that. But
right.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think they made a really good movie. It's very poignant. There's a lot of thought-provoking information, and I think it was pretty solid. I'd go with an 8 too.
Yeah,
so I got one more thing. Just in the vein of like being on Amazon Prime and spiritual kind of movies and shows, y'all should try to watch Good Omens on Prime.
Okay.
It's a show. There's 2 seasons of it right now.
A show.
But it's pretty good too.
Okay. I'll put it on my list. Yeah. Okay. Before we split.
Well.
Like my monkey humor? That was a good one, Hayden. Too bad we're not goats unfiltered. Anyways, before we split, and we've been a little heavy and down in some what could be construed as controversial conversation, let's do a little Monday monkey mischief. And if you swung through this week, you saw that I posted dogs cannot operate MRI machines, but cats scan. Yeah, you can chalk that one up to the good doctor. Well, thanks for all of you who stuck with us to the bitter end. If you have not seen Nefarious, clearly this panel of monkeys highly recommends it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can reach us at monkeysunfiltered.com, and we look forward to hanging out with you in the jungle next week. Be sure you like and follow us on social. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast.
Peace out, monkeys.
Bye, monkeys.
Adios.
Ciao. Hold on, my other screen
my
just...
little beach.
My other screen just went...
What did it do?
You heard me.
What did it do? Let me see.
No.
You have it on recording.
No, I'm not getting at the end of the video of the episode.
You already are. We're recording.